Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast 5 Minute Frights, wherein, give or take 5 minutes, we'll try to share something creepy, kooky, mysterious, spooky, something fun and frightful that you can add to your to-watch queue as we all get ready for Halloween season. My name is Bernie Gonzalez, and on this episode, I'm joined by fellow horror fan Chad, and we're talking about 1983's Christine, directed by John Carpenter.
Stephen King, John Carpenter, two great masters of terror, have teamed up to take you for a ride. Christine, based on the best-selling novel by Stephen King.
It has a $10 million budget, and it makes $21 million in the box office. It's a film adaptation of Stephen King's 1983 novel as well. Follows a young man with a classic automobile that's innocuously named Christine. According to Carpenter, he said that Christine was not a film he planned on directing. He treated it more as a job as opposed to a personal project like some of his other films. So he was coming off The Thing, and Christine was, as he put it, something I needed to do at the time for my career. So some pretty good self-awareness.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you know what Stephen King's involvement in the film was?
The producer on Salem's Lot had also purchased the rights for Christine as well, along with another, it might have been Silver Bullet, I'm not sure, but there was another Stephen King story that he'd purchased. So my guess is that Stephen King himself probably didn't have much to contribute as far as the film itself, because Carpenter has said how he wanted the story to go in a completely different way. And in the book, King is much more overt about the fact that Christine, the 1958 Plymouth Fury, that it's possessed by a killer. And in the book, they actually named the killer and goes into some of the background on that. Whereas in the movie, it's just kind of understood it's possessed by this evil force, not necessarily the backstory behind it.
Right. That's interesting. I know I read the book when I was younger. I know that I snuck in to the Hawthorne movie complex in Vernon Hills. There was a babysitter, and she had friends. It wasn't at my house, but it was like, I went over to a friend's house. There was a babysitter there for the night, and she wanted to go see this movie. She was old enough to drive, and so she snuck us in. And I remember that weird sort of thing where it's the difference between watching a movie with friends of yours that you don't really want to be vulnerable around or something. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's like, it's different when you're watching movies and you're like a 13-year-old boy or whatever, and you're watching a scary movie and in a basement with your friend. And so you pull the sleeping bag over your head or you whatever. And like the reality just kind of gets more and more claustrophobic of like, oh, this is scary. This is scary. Oh my God. And part of it is like being scared of the film. But then when you're sitting there and there's like these two very attractive 16-year-old high school girls that have taken you to this movie because they wanted to see it, suddenly you're not scared of the movie anymore. Like there's something more interesting happening, largely that you're like, I don't know exactly why I'm attracted to these girls, but I am, and I'm certainly not going to piss myself watching this car. I remember that vividly, being like, this might have been scary in the basement, but this is not scary sitting next to these two girls. It's funny, like looking back, they were only 3 years older, but that's a big 3 years, 16, 17, you know? And but there was just this, it was just this weird feeling of like, I wasn't trying to be cool. But I was more terrified of the girls, like how cool they were than I was of any movie that they could have shown right then. But and then I saw it later on in my life, and I thought it was fine. I think it's an okay movie. It's nothing special.
I'll say the one thing about the movie is that I think it gets lost among all the other films that Carpenter did in the 80s. It's not as strong, but at least it does have a few memorable moments. I always think about the car's regeneration scenes. Those are pretty interesting. The closing shot where the car, Christine, has been crushed into this cube, but a piece of the grill begins to kind of straighten, so you think, oh, it may come back. It doesn't have the power of Michael Myers resurrecting and lifting himself up in the background while Laurie Strode is on the phone and trying to figure out, what just happened. That scene has power. Christine regenerating, it's a great visual, but it doesn't necessarily translate to being scared or taking that away from you outside of the theater.
Right. I agree.
And initially, Columbia Pictures wanted to cast Brooke Shields in the role of Lee after the release of Blue Lagoon, where she had some critical acclaim. And initially, Scott Baio was considered for the role of Arnie, the awkward, unpopular teen who ends up befriending Christine. But Carpenter wanted to cast relatively unknown actors. And just as a side note, Kevin Bacon actually auditioned for the role of Arnie too, but he opted out to do another small movie that's become somewhat popular with the kids, Footloose, back in 1984.
Everybody, cut everybody.